Okay, so we just wait a few minutes for people to join. The count is going up, and then we'll kick it off in a couple of seconds.
Cool.
Welcome to everybody joining from wherever you are in the world. This is Andrew Turner joining from London, and we have our two initial speakers already online. Welcome, Milan. Welcome, Jon. We can see that we've now got different settings now with this Zoom model where we can. I'm flying in the clouds, and Jon's on the beach. Is that Hawaii, Jon? You're in? Okay. So what we'd like to do today is welcome to the webinar. This is the second London Test Automation in DevOps online meetup for this year, for 2020. We ran a session back in March, which was very successful, so we thought we'd do it again. And thank you for joining from wherever you are in the world. We're recording this episode, recording this webinar, so it'll be available on YouTube afterwards. And thank you for joining to learn more about automation. And we call it a triple header because we've got some amazing speakers tonight. Milan from N26, Jon from Provar Testing, and Michael Bolton is going to be joining us a bit later on. And we're going to be talking about some interesting subjects related to test automation in DevOps, about the mobile, how you do mobile testing, how you do cloud testing, and also a bit of a kind of a finale with Michael talking about the secret life of automation, which is a bit of a kind of a stealth one for tonight. The session should last about an hour and a half. We're going to have a quick bio break in the middle, and then we're going to finish off with a panel at the end. So if you have any questions that you want to submit for the panel later on, we're happy to go through that. So a bit of logistics. As I said, welcome to everybody joining us today. We're using Zoom webinar, so we will make a recording available. Everybody will be muted during the actual recording of the session, but we will obviously open that up, and you can go through the chat button or Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You should be able to use that for any things you want to talk to us about or raise any questions. And look forward to your participation in today's session. So covered the logistics, the agenda for today. In terms of our community, originally this meetup group was organized by my good co-organizer Shashi Jagtap. He asked me to get involved a few years ago, and we've run quite a few successful meetups over the last few years, mainly physical events. So now we have I think we've probably just gone over the 3,000 members actually today, which is a great milestone for the group. As I said, we normally run 3 or 4 physical events in and around London at various different organizations or various different locations. Now we're moving to online during 2020. We don't currently get any sponsors for this group, but obviously we've had some great support from various different people across the community. You know, we had some great speakers back in March, and obviously we're constantly talking to lots of other speakers, and it's great that we could get these speakers on tonight. If anybody's interested in speaking at future events, either online or through as we reconvene, hopefully to be in 2020 at some point getting together physically, then obviously you can send me some email or let me know how you want to get involved. So without any further ado, I will lovely speak to span over to Milan from N26 Bank in Berlin. Thanks for staying up so late today, Milan, and look forward to your presentation now. So over to Milan. Okay.
Okay, now I'm muted. Okay, good. Good evening. Hello, everyone. Hope you're all doing well in this weird time. And thanks for joining tonight. I'm having some free time after work, or if you're somewhere outside of Europe for lunch break, maybe. My name is Milan, and tonight I want to talk to you about automation in mobile testing, and particularly how we do it at N26. And I hope you'll enjoy the talk, and maybe I can answer some questions afterwards. So for you who don't know yet, N26 is a tech company building a digital bank. We are a tech company with around 400 engineers, different profiles located in 4 offices. Berlin is our home and headquarters, but we also have offices in Barcelona, Spain, and in New York. And the latest opening of our office was in Vienna. Our technology is based on distributed systems, so we work with microservices. It's a very popular approach to building tech stack today. We are deploying them more than 400 times a week to production, and these services are consumed by our mobile apps because that's our main product. And those apps are having very nice reviews on the store, which we're very proud of. Of course, we also try to build our apps to be accessible by disabled people as well. What I do there, I work as head of quality engineering, and since more than 4 years. And in my role, I'm helping development teams to build highest quality software, especially in the banking is even the higher bar than usual, by using good practices, techniques, and leveraging tools to help, particularly in automation testing, but also in other parts of software delivery. I work closely with pretty much all engineering roles, with software engineers, quality engineers, security, SRE, with product owners, designers, and pretty much everyone who is involved in tech. Previously, I was working in some other startups here in Berlin, and my career started as a test consultant, working in large financial organizations like banking and insurance companies. This is my Twitter handle, so if you want to get in touch later, that would be also nice. So today or tonight, I will explore the journey of automation in mobile testing. I will talk about main principles which are important to adopt when we start thinking about automation. What is the scope of automation? How do you and can automate? How do you design the architecture? What components do you need to have? How and what tools can you choose to help on this? And how to succeed and have it as a continuous practice in mobile application delivery. So if we look at how the mobile application lifecycle usually looks, probably in some companies didn't change since first mobile apps showed up in 2008. Basically, we have mobile engineers on one side who are building the apps, working together in one team or in a larger functional team, implementing features, and then once they are done, they build a test application, which is then tested against in some test environment by test engineers, and then there is a lot of back and forth before the app is ready to be released. So basically, there are different methodologies in the process that is probably used differently, different organization, but in a nutshell, this is how the process looked like, or even today still looks like in some companies. Once the requirements are met, so if all the tests pass, the release proceeds to the relevant stores. I included here only iOS and Android apps. I don't really have so much experience with Windows, but I assume that it's very similar process for it. But what is the problem here? Like, what kind of challenges can we see? If we're building the app for a small target group, or we don't know yet if our business is successful, then probably we will not try to to complicate our process. So maybe this approach works well, but if we aim for big and excellent, if we are building the bank where the money flows, and we want to change how this thing works, we probably need to take a look deeper into how we can streamline our process. Especially if we want to release quite often, then this kind of process wouldn't work well. I will just mention that more than 3 years ago, and when we were a much smaller company, our release cycle was approximately 6 to 8 weeks cadence. One of the challenges that we can definitely see is that testing becomes much slower, and it requires more people to be involved if we start building more features. And time to market is very important, of course, so we want our features to reach out to the customers as fast as possible. And if you see usually application which is released just right through the store, and you download it, and then maybe a day after you have a new version, that is a clear sign that there was an issue found during the previous release. On the other side, the number of mobile devices is growing every year. If we look at the Android ecosystem, we can see a tremendous number of different hardware combined with different software versions, so OS versions. So this is very difficult to track. And also on the other side, on Apple is releasing every year at least through the 3 different iPhone versions with the new OS version, with different resolutions, etc. So this is very not scaling if you have a simple manual process to follow the releases. So what could be solution? Somehow naturally comes to automation. It was successful in many other industries, in car industry, in manufacturers. So why not? Like it was also successful on the website. So if you look at Selenium, how it disrupted the test automation on web. So why not doing it also on mobile? So there are several assumptions that are always present in talking about automation. So when we say automation, usually we look at it as some solution that will just work out of nowhere. And sometimes we even try to see those codeless solutions where you can just install and it will just work by pressing one button. And this is usually counted as silver bullet, which in most situations doesn't work. When we start about automation, we also think that everything we can automate, or just we can get rid of our problems that we have with our manual processes. Also, automation is usually considered as testing, and we can automate testing. We have big aims, we have big appetites, so this is very often considered as a wrong assumption. Of course, there is a lot of tools on the market, and tools can help automation, but tool itself is not the most important part of the process. And then something that I will also emphasize later is that automation is one role job. This usually fails very often because one role cannot handle all the challenges that automation can bring to the process. So because all of these assumptions that can lead to automation in a wrong direction, it's important to trigger the discussion about common principles in an organization that can be adopted to drive automation forward. So one of the principles that I think is very important is that one test which is executed is not really a test anymore, and it's a check. And if you need to repeat the check, you can try to automate it. Sometimes you will succeed. In some cases, probably it will not work. And checks are usually part of regression, which are a significant part of mobile app releases. So principles that we taken at 26 was, if you need to repeat something, you automate it, and this does not count only for testing, but all activities before and after testing. And effective team collaboration means that not only QA or testers can be responsible, but the whole development team. Nobody is supporting any specific role, but is taking really the ownership around this. There are different testing approaches that can be taken, and in mobile automation it's very important to define and design the scope for automation. Tooling is important, especially deciding on what tool can solve what kind of problem from what technical perspective. And the tools will be used by different people, different roles, so this needs to be really taken carefully. Automation doesn't stop, so you never really finish it. It's not like code that you need to like complete. So it's a living code together with the products, and it's in constant improvements and tuning. So if we take this principle separately, I mentioned at the beginning that we had separate groups of testers and mobile developers, which worked separately on implementation and on testing. And this often can be seen as a smell that can bring automation potential risk. Risk that feature development will always be faster, automation will laggy, or you will not, or sometimes you have projects in different phases of the development, and this sometimes can lead to different directions. Regressions can grow, releases can become slower, etc., etc. Product development has end-to-end integration, and it only produces the value when it's completed, delivered to the customer. So every team member needs to own this in their domain, and that's the same with mobile test automation. As a goal, it only has value to the product as when it's looked end to end. It's important to think about the scope. So we are looking in what tests we create and where exactly. So if you look at the application we are developing, we have layers of components that we need to cover with tests. Unit tests somehow come together with implementation, even though not always is the culture of development. If we start going into the upper layers, we will find components which are tested via integration tests, or from the mobile perspective, components can be views or screens, and those can be tested on the integration level. Views are exposing the UI models, and they can define screens or dialogues, and those components can be tested on the UI or snapshot level. Acceptance tests, as we know, are verifying functionality from the user perspective, and they are usually performed end-to-end and require a complete app to be built. Exploratory testing, even though doesn't belong exactly to the automation, but it's a very important part in discovering issues early by exploring the app, and can play important role in testing the scope for automation. An example could be an issue or an error case that can be automated easily on the UI or end-to-end level. When we look at the UI automated tests or snapshots, we need to understand what can be the expectation, but also dependencies. With UI automation, we don't expect external dependency because everything can be pretty much mocked, and it doesn't need compiled up, so it can be very fast feedback from those tests. And that's very common for UI or snapshot automation, and we can execute UI tests on board real devices or simulators in the development environment. The user acceptance tests or end-to-end tests are usually executed on specific environments. We call it state test or staging or QA environment, but basically the app is pointing to the environment, mimicking the real user journey, connecting to the API, and again, execution is possible on real devices, and most likely it will be executed on those ones. Now that we know the scope of the tests, we can start designing our architecture for mobile testing flows and frameworks. So there are different parts of the architecture that we need to consider, and we need to pay attention to and invest. One of them is domain. So domain in a framework means how we are going to structure our tests. It can reflect your product structure or mobile application structure. So how and where you are going to place your tests, classes. This can also depend on the tools you're using. For instance, if we are speaking about BDD tools, where we are writing test scenarios, or if we are using pure code for tests, it is important to have a structured domain which can be reused later on an extended without so much effort. Test data is very often underestimated, and usually it's at the beginning not considered the crucial part of the architecture. If you are mocking dependencies, probably it's very clear but if you're using real data from a specific environment, we should consider how we are going to distribute this data across the framework. So there are different ways to use static data configured in files and consumed by test classes, or more sophisticated ways by using dynamic data, always freshly created within frameworks or with the help of some API helpers or external tools. The dynamic data is again created in a specific environment. This can guarantee more reliability in test results, and it's also important that this is also part of the automation, even though it's not testing, but it's automating the test data that the test will consume in its execution. Test data is stored in either infrastructure, like the real data, or we can differentiate different test environments provided by frameworks like mocking or stubbing, and some of the organization also perform automated testing in production. If you're working in a bank, this can be a bit problematic because of compliance problems, but not really impossible. It's also automation because provisioning environments, refreshing the data and everything, it's part of the automated process. Where do we execute our tests? So we have several options when we are talking about physical devices, or we can use devices on the cloud. So there are many companies offering this service today. So basically real devices plugged into some distributed center where it can be then consumed via API, and most of those companies provide and support majority of the testing frameworks on mobile today. As we have our tests automated, we need to have a way to execute them on a regular basis. So there is always an option, someone to just pressing the button manually and execute them, but that wouldn't be really a complete solution. So that's why we can reuse those CI servers that are being used for other platforms like backend or web to also execute tests for mobile automation. And yes, it's also automated process of executing the automated tests on mobile. Last but not least, how we're going to understand where our tests are failing, how we're going to fix them, if not tests, but other pieces of automation flow. We have to have proper reporting, and majority of the reporting frameworks, being that pure, I don't know, TestNG or JUnit or HTML reporting, can help in providing these kind of reports, but also there are more sophisticated reporting like data visualizations and monitoring using Elasticsearch or Grafana, Kibana, or whatever tool that can feed those results over there. And it's also automation because you created automated reports that can trigger some alerts or provide some regular feedback from the test execution. You might be wondering that why we're not talking about tools yet, but I always find interesting that when we start thinking about automation, somehow the first thought goes into tooling. But my experience is that tooling should come much later when we actually define what we want to do and what are our goals. And of course, tools are important because they will solve some of the challenges. So we need to consider what kind of capabilities tool have. Does it meet our specific needs? Does it solve all our needs? We need several different tools. What is the budget? So is it open source? Is it commercial? So all these aspects need to be considered before even thinking about what tool can help us. If you look at the market, we see that we have various tools that support both platforms, like Appium or Calabash, or we have platform specific like Espresso or Xcode UI tests. There are some newer tools on the market today that still did not get enough adoption here. How did we structure our tooling around the frameworks that we built here? So we chose from the early beginning Appium as our tool for automated testing on native applications, mainly for end-to-end tests. And on the other side, for UI and snapshot, we chose mostly the native frameworks which are friendly for our developers to use in their regular development workflow. To get a bit more details on the frameworks, so we have a framework built using Appium with Java and Kotlin bindings with testng for execution. It's a framework used in Java environment to easily execute test cases by defining annotations for each test that can be later grouped together. And then we use page object model as a design pattern to enhance test maintenance and reduce code duplication. As we have page object representing each object class that serves as an interface to our application page screen, and our tests are then executed on Jenkins and packaged into a Docker image. Docker is here helping us to that we don't need to really take care a lot about environments and versions of our dependencies. It will be packaged and always pick up the latest version. Tests are executed on the cloud. In our case, we use Sauce Labs as a platform which supports most of our frameworks that we use for testing. And then upon successful or failed build, it sends the message to the channel, either individually to person responsible or to the team channels. And then our UI or snapshot framework for UI testing is pretty much similar, just it has different tools inside of the framework for native Espresso on Android and Xcode UI tests for iOS, and everything else, all the tooling around it are pretty much the same and the process looks the same. So now if we build all capabilities to enable or automation mobile testing, we need to have this as a practice for continuous testing, basically. So continuous testing explains the process of writing test cases for a feature and then pushing the automation code to the repository, having Jenkins executing those tests and building Docker image with all dependencies and sending data reports to the chosen form, feeding the data visualization or just HTML reporting. And then on a green build, we can send the application to be released or ready to be released for the store. So just a fragment on how the test report can look like. Of course, I put the green one, but that's not always the case. There are much more the red ones that are happening on a daily basis for our test execution. If we need to take or have some takeaways from this session, I would emphasize a few things. It's important to layer test architecture so not everything can be tested on the same level, especially on the end-to-end level. It needs to be very careful what they are putting because the feedback loops are much slower, and especially on the mobile side because we have device in the whole process. And we saw that unit UI and snapshot testing are much more flexible. So this way, we can reduce the regression if we spend and invest in building our automation processes. And it needs to be considered as a development effort and not something that will be extra done afterwards, but by some special team force. Tools are helpers on our journey and to build automated processes, but not the goal itself. So we need to be very careful what tools we are choosing, and leveraging them to achieve certain goals is important to understand, but also when the tool is not meeting certain expectations. Last but not least, fast feedback is something that we aim for, and automated workflows are providing us this. Mobile automation technology is still in its race, so not everything is super mature as we would like to be. So there is a lot of work done on, especially on the open source tooling side. And if we put everything together in our environments, we need to constantly improve and evolve our automated processes and tooling, because especially on the testing side, test code is also live code. So if we don't care about it as live, it will soon become obsolete. So I hope you enjoyed the session, and I'm happy to answer some questions if they arrived. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks, Milan. That was fantastic. Thank you for going through that. It was amazing slides. I need to ask you to do my slides next time.
Yeah.
We've got a couple of questions from the group, actually. So one of the questions was, do you use any tools for reporting dashboards? That was one of the first questions from Sat.
just to understand which tools we are using, or
yeah. So for reporting, I presume reporting status and progress.
yeah.
Do you use any particular tools for reporting? You know, like a dashboard reporting status of your test automation in the mobile
Yeah,
world?
so I think I put a screenshot of Allure. So this is a
Okay.
reporting tool that we use for all our tests. We try to unify one tool whenever possible, because it creates an easier way for each type of tests to understand better, rather than having a bunch of different reporting tools. So this worked well. Of course, there is also if you use one tool for multiple different purposes, it can be a single point of failure. But in this case, it's also an open source free tool to use. So there is a lot of good contributions. So we decided for this one, and so far it works well. Of course, there is always a backup for pure Jenkins report or JUnit log report that can be also reused with the same way.
Okay, I think Scott shared the link to that. So if you look in the chat, you can see allure.qa-tools.ru. So it's like that's somebody sharing from the community. That's great, thank you. Next one from Sat was, what are the key challenges you face on a regular basis?
So the key challenges is, for instance, using new technologies in mobile. For instance, on iOS and Android, because the technologies for building features are developing much faster than testing frameworks. So if you look at, for instance, machine learning, or for instance, if you look at Siri, for instance, the WebKit for Siri on iOS is much more developed, or much faster developed than support in Appium, for instance. It came much later on it. So this kind of bridging this gap between the technology development on testing and on development side is sometimes challenging, not impossible, but it takes longer to overcome this. And also sometimes it's also important to understand how much do you invest in automation. So do you really go nuts and start planning your automation and never finish the feature development? But it's also important to justify the costs of it and how much is enough. When do you stop? That's also one of the things that are important to understand very well.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's a bit like a race, isn't it? You've got all the variants of Android, and obviously there's a bit more control with the iOS, but you've still got a race to keep up with stuff and make sure you keep in line with all the releases that are out there, all the variants.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I've spent 20 years in the mobile industry, so I can relate to just exactly what you just said. Okay, next question was about, let's have a look. There's a question that Adrian has raised, which I'm gonna put into the panel discussion a bit later about the future and what the evolution is, so we can pick that up later. One of the questions from Scott was about what was the hardest part of getting Appium set up?
I mean, it's not really hard to set it up. I mean, Appium is a pretty straightforward tool. The biggest challenges are when there is a major update. They usually need to update once there is an OS update, and this can break a lot of things. So, for instance, whenever iOS brings a major update, updating Appium can potentially break a lot of stuff. So updates are quite complex, and it needs to be really tested well. Setting up itself, it's not really a big deal. And usually when you set it up, you start very small, so you don't really want to go crazy around the whole app. So you start with the very simple things and configure it and test your tests at the beginning. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for that. Next one was a good one from Oleg, actually, which was about how do you juggle between testing and automation? At which point you decide what that you're going to automate something, i.e., from a planning point of view. What's the kind of thinking around that?
It's not really a lot of thinking around it, because you start first with, you always start what is your business value. So what's your customer is going to what if this breaks? What will happen with your customer? Will he reach out to customer service or not? Will it has a lot of financial impact on your customer? So you start from there and you say, okay, this test, if I don't automate, I need to run it manually. It will eat a lot of time, etc., etc. Then you can start from what's easy to automate. So you can automate some very easy stuff, or then you can go to much more advanced things like error handling or audio visual automation, etc. So it's like the same way you start with any kind of testing itself, right? So you start first with basic stuff, with most important features, and then you go further down the feature set.
Okay, really useful, thank you. So the next one from Carrie Muller was how to manage multiple test suites management maintenance if you're working on multiple virtual machines away from the version control system. It's how to manage multiple test suite management maintenance if you're working on multiple virtual machines away from the version control system. Any thoughts on that?
Not sure if I understand very well, but let me try to answer. So current tools and frameworks support parallel execution, so you can manage test execution on multiple test suites however you want. In CI servers also support that, so you can, like, the concept is not different than any other CI/CD system. So you do it pretty much the same. It's just that you have this component of binary file that you need to upload to a device or something. So this is the complexity of it. How do you manage your test suites of different features? So as I mentioned, there is an ownership of the test suites, the same way there is an ownership of features. We use somehow the Conway's law. So basically, if you sit in one team and you own certain set of features, you also own those test suites for those features. So you need to maintain it the same way you maintain the features as well. So that's the way how we manage to have good maintenance. Of course, there is always a problem of what when you change the team, what if one team is stop existing and moving to another, but then it's the same with features, like what if this happens to the features, so it's the same way. So when you inherit certain feature, you inherit tests, so that way you can maintain it very well.
Okay, fantastic.
I hope I understood this question.
Yeah, it's quite a long one. Karen Muller's, you asked quite a complex one there. Testing on an early, well, quite late Tuesday evening for you, Milan. So the final question, I think, before we pass over to John, is from Sarah. Do you have different teams for Android and iOS, and how do you integrate the teams? So that was the final question we're going to go on this.
Yeah. So as I mentioned in my previous answer, so we follow the sort of the feature ownership. So and we have cross-functional teams. So one team has all necessary skills and profiles to handle all feature development end-to-end. So one team has Android and iOS engineers, have quality engineers, have all other backend, SRE, security, product, whatever is needed, and they all manage this development. So there is no centralized iOS or Android team which is handling everything alone. So that's how they work together.
Okay. So that's great. Thank you for doing that. We actually just got another question. You're very popular tonight, Milan. You've got a...
That's nice.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, coming live from Berlin. Yeah. So Sam's just raised another question, or Sam Ferguson just raised a question. As UI testing is more expensive against unit API testing, I presume he's saying versus unit API testing, what proportion of testing should be automated at the UI? Should it be only critical tests?
So I think I explained in details those scopes. So UI testing is not really super expensive because it does not depend on the external environment. So it can be done pretty much in the app. The expensive ones is end-to-end. So when you actually connect the dots and you run as a journey, so end-to-end tests. So those ones needs to be really taken care of carefully and understood what is the most important test that we can automate on this level, and everything else pull down to the layers, if possible on units. If not, what is more complex, what is the integration between modules, components, views, can be automated on the UI level. And then on Android and iOS, it's a different what is UI. So on iOS is like presenting the view, and then you can test the I don't know, dialogues, buttons, while on Android UI can be also a journey, so you can share it between the screens. Then you also have snapshot tests where you can generate the snapshots from this, like some sort of visual testing, which is also very convenient and not super expensive in terms of development, but also maintenance, where you just generate all the screenshots of your app, and then you can compare per version or per build. So this is somehow how to structure it, how to invest more in something which is more scalable and reliable and maintainable, rather than in something which is more complex and prone to more maintenance and issues.
Fantastic. Well, a mountain of value there from Milan, from N26. Thank you so much for doing that presentation and doing the Q&A live, which is always, you never know what the questions are going to be. Yeah. It's even more impressive. So I obviously should have had different backgrounds, because I should have started with a mobile background, shouldn't I suppose? But now since I've had a cloud background, I suppose it's a good introduction to my next speaker for tonight, Mr. Jon Robinson, to join from Provar Testing. So over to you, Jon. Thank you, Milan. Look forward to getting you on the panel in a few minutes. The stage is yours, Jon.
All right, there we go. I was trying to get off mute there. So really quickly, I will kind of walk you through a little bit of just what is, who I am, what's Provar, give you an idea of what is our kind of approach, what we're trying to do, and kind of walk you through what testing in the cloud kind of looks like. So I'm head of North America for Provar Testing. I am the kind of end-all be-all person when it comes to process improvement. That's where my space is. I kind of geek out over it. I've been in IT for the last 25 years, 15 in QA and testing, and everything from the small startup to the large enterprises, and everything in between. I've seen a lot, and hopefully some of that will come through in this. A little bit about Provar. We're the #1 automation tool for Salesforce. We were founded and we're currently headquartered in London, and we have offices in Nashville and New Delhi. I am in Nashville, contrary to what my background is showing, but it looks nothing like that outside right now. So I went with something that was actually warm and inviting. So that being said, let's kind of jump into the meat of this. So what is end-to-end cloud testing? Let's kind of frame this and set some staging here. Your traditional internal systems are, they've been migrating for several years now away from the mainframe and the desktop-based applications. And to a large degree, they're existing entirely in the cloud. Even those applications that were traditionally hosted internally or were homegrown systems are slowly moving to cloud-based systems, either by being hosted there, on an AWS infrastructure or Azure or something along those lines, to, platforms that are designed to be cloud-based, Salesforce, for example. This allows for that much more rapid development cycle, which is a great thing. But what used to be measured in years and months are now measured in months and weeks. And you've lost a lot of the time to do that planning and have that runway, right? You no longer have that lead time. That's leading to this kind of increased pressure on QA and testing teams to get more done in less time. If you're on a QA or test team and have seen this transition, I'm sure you can empathize here. It's been a very, in some cases, rapid switch, especially if you were with one model and now you're all of a sudden in the other. It's a very different thing now. when you throw that in, now that you're shortening the dev cycle, you've got your systems more widely distributed. Everything's not all in one place. Milan kind of stole my thunder a little bit, but he also, kind of mentioned that the heavy lifting is in the end-to-end aspect of things. So if you take this picture, for example, I know it's very fantastical and made up and, in this case, specific to a Salesforce environment, but if you look at it and you look at the spread of all of the different tools and applications and processes and databases and ancillary systems that kind of go along with it, how do you start to string all this together into a cohesive end-to-end flow? How do you get from point A to point B in a way that actually makes sense and tests the things that you need to test? To Milan's point, this is complex stuff. It's not like it's a straightforward thing, because there's a lot of challenges that come along with that. So if we look at the benefits of what you can get if you can solve this puzzle, yes, there's a lot of moving parts, but you can succeed at it. The return on investment can look like a lot of different things. The numbers I'm going to state are from real case studies that we've done, from customers that have moved to a end-to-end based testing model. They've seen 75% reduction in test effort. Their reported issues from the users went down 56%, which isn't as impressive as 75%, but let me tell you, when you've got customers screaming, any reduction is a great reduction. And this is one of the biggest ones. Production hotfixes went from 21 to 5. The most impressive part about all of these numbers is these are from their first 4 months of implementation. From the first 4 months of getting started, a third of the year, they already had a direct return on the investment of putting automation in place. If you want more, you can go look at the case study online. We've got a lot more detail there. But the other aspect of this is that it really allows you to expand the scope of your testing. There's a lot of benefits to that where you used to only be able to focus on one area of your application or one specific type of testing. This allows you to kind of expand that scope out and look at it in a lot wider range. So if we now go and look at what some of those challenges that I mentioned earlier are, the biggest one is, probably the hardest one to work with. You have a lack of control over the full ecosystem, right? When everything was hosted in-house and you could control when an update was pushed out or when a release was delivered to a given environment, you were able to create these, I don't want to call them sterile environments, but very tightly controlled environments that you knew where things were at, what was happening when, and you knew that when you tested something and you tested it this sprint and the next sprint and the next sprint and the next sprint, or in the case of waterfall method back in the day, you knew what you were testing against and you knew that what it was yesterday is the same thing as what it is today. That's not really the case anymore. A lot of cloud-based applications have release cycles the same as you do, right? If the bigger they are, the more likely they are to have an actual published release window or release cycle. But that's not always the case. Sometimes you'll get patches in the middle, or there will be feature deprecation to feature changes for systems that you're including in your end-to-end tests that you have no idea when something changes. And so that really needs to be taken into account. You've got the web standards are getting better in general, but the reality is there's still a lot of compatibility challenges and issues just with getting them to be, consistent, right? Having them all on the same page, making sure that your applications all support the same features and functionalities and handle things in the same way. Shadow DOM being a good example, right? Not every system handles it or treats it the exact same way. Knowing what those are and what those changes are is super important. You've got browser specific compatibility. You've got, things that a lot of applications today are really designed for Chrome. It's got a wide. It supports the web at its core and the standards quicker than any of the other browsers out there. It's designed to be, on the bleeding edge of that, and that's great. But you oftentimes will run across either an application that has been designed specifically for a different browser, IE 11, anybody? That makes that a lot harder because those two systems, IE and Chrome, are just two vastly different things, and their compatibility between each other. There are things that work in one and don't work in the other, in both directions, and so that makes it a little bit of a challenge. Even something as widely adopted as Safari, just because of the iPad browsers and in the Mac browsers, great adoption rate, but there's still feature compatibility between those even. To that extent, browser upgrades themselves, right? The chief culprit among them is Chrome, who, is on a fairly aggressive release cycle, doing releases fairly consistently every couple of months, which is great. But, as I'll show here in a second, every release has got 20 plus new features or changes in it, that you don't always know what the direct impact of those are going to be, both on your testing and on the tools that you're using with that. Your development doesn't often give consideration to test automation. That's a huge problem in the grand scheme of things, right? They're not really considering, when they make changes to how code generated HTML is delivered or rendered on the page, what that does to test automation, or when they make changes to the DOM structure, what the ramifications of that are. And so it's worth having that conversation with them to kind of keep them on the same page. That it's a big list, and there are lots and lots of challenges to it, but the reality is, in some ways, end-to-end testing is getting easier as well, because one of the things that we've seen lately is a lot of consolidation in the application market, especially in the enterprise space, where what used to be a lot of disparate apps that all had a very specific function that did one thing, now you're starting to see a lot of those things get pulled into bigger application suites, where they all live within one application platform and they have one standard, and everything is a lot more consistent. That does add a lot of ease. So if you kind of look at this picture and you look at all of these things together, what you end up with is a scenario that kind of looks like this. And I wish this was a made up example, but it could not have been more perfect for kind of illustrating exactly what I'm talking about. If you've got say a 6-month cycle, your sprints are 4 weeks long, and it's a 6-month cycle starting back in January, going to the end of July. Over the course of that time, you'll have 3 Chrome releases, for a total of 70 new features included along the way. You'll have a Workday release, with another one coming shortly thereafter in September. You will have 2 different Salesforce releases, one in February and another one here getting ready to drop. And all along the way, if you look at that in conjunction with your sprint cycle, that means you have now every single sprint a potentially major change or environmental factor that has to be included in your testing. And taking all of those things into account makes it really difficult to know that when you get to that sprint 6 and you have, your final set of go live tests that you're trying to run, and you're trying to do that full end-to-end verification, you're dealing with, even right up until the last minute, a Chrome release. That makes it very difficult to kind of make sure that everything that you're doing is accurate and on time. So how can you kind of get around this and deal with it? So what I'll do is kind of run through a few best practices to hopefully keep you on the straight and narrow to some degree. first thing is, define your needs and create an automation roadmap. It was great in that, Milan and I did not coordinate on this at all, but there were so many themes that seemed to cross and intersect between the two, and you'll see a lot of recurring elements between both of the presentations. And this is one area. The biggest thing is define what your needs actually are. Figure out what your roadmap is going to look like, and really flesh that out in a way that allows you to deliver faster with a higher level of confidence, right? It doesn't mean that you have to do everything, but really focus on, for your specific environment and your specific need, what is going to give you the best chance of success when your release comes out, what is going to give you the best chance for a stable, reliable release, and let you get there in the most effective way and efficient way possible. The other thing that this does is it gives you a guide to kind of base your future needs off of and changes off of, because we all know, regardless of what you define on day one, it will change along the way. But at least this way you have a baseline to say, this is where we started and this was our original intent, and how close are we staying to that and staying true to that? Are we getting off the beaten path? It gives your leadership and other teams a way to kind of see, how are we doing in terms of automation? What automation is available? And it shows you a lack of progress, or hopefully not, but also a lack thereof, right? Maybe you're not making as much progress as it seems like you're making. Being able to see and understand that is really, really important. Next, consistently assess and adjust as you're going. The big thing is, it's not a fire and forget kind of scenario, right? You're not going to just start automating and never check in on it. If you do, what you'll find is that you're more than likely gonna go off the beaten path at some point and not really add the value you think you're adding. The biggest thing is to make sure that there's a consistency in what you're delivering. It's also a good way for you to check in and say, is what we started with and what we are doing today still what we need to do? Are there new things that need to be done that should be done and take priority over these? Are there new approaches and new methods that allow us to be more effective at doing this without impacting our ability to deliver? And it lets you just have a quick check-in to see if you're in line with your roadmap, which is a super important thing, right? You need, if you taken the time to create that roadmap, making sure that you're still in line with that is super, super important. Next one is something that oftentimes gets overlooked, but really work to enable your entire organization. By that I mean, are you building things that only you or your team can access and run and execute and take advantage of, or are you building things in such a way that they can be slipped into your CI/CD pipeline, or used for deployment purposes or delivery purposes? Is it the kind of thing that you can give to other teams or departments to run for their deliverables? It doesn't make sense. One of the biggest challenges that I run into a lot is when people duplicate effort, right? They rerun or rebuild the same tests. I went into one organization and kid you not, there were 7 different ways of testing the exact same thing, including 3 different languages being used. At the end of the day, we really settled on one of them, but we had spent the time at some point along the way to build 7 different variations of the same thing. It's just a waste of resources. Talk to each other, make sure your entire organization gets advantages from what you're trying to build. Another big one, kind of in line with what Milan was talking about, but clearly, outline who owns what aspect of your approach, right? Who owns what areas of the process, who decide who's going to build the tests, who's going to maintain them, who's going to execute them, who's responsible for delivering the reporting and the metrics and keeping things in a consistent fashion. These are all things that oftentimes you certain pieces of it get doled out, but you tend to see some areas of it just not have an owner, or there's a lack of clear ownership for a specific given area. So take the time to really understand and define who owns what. It will save you a lot of headache in the long run. And then, you know, one of the big things is you've done all the work up above, allocate your time and resources accordingly. Don't just, you know, throw them off on an island, right? You know, there's a lot of different ways you can go about this. You can embed the resources in the way that Milan was discussing. You can have a separate team that's dedicated just to automation and building these out. They can be working in Sprint. They can be working in Sprint plus N. They can be working in a completely different path entirely. Whatever is the best approach for you and your organization, go down that road. Don't try and shoehorn yourself into somebody else's approach. And you know, I kind of mentioned it a minute ago, but the biggest PSA that I can give you is don't stick your automation people off on an island by themselves. Even if you have them on a separate team, right, include them in the rest of the organization. Because one of the things that is important to note, you know, and Milan kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier, is everywhere you see a gear icon on there is where automation can be slipped into the process from a development lifecycle standpoint. And so it's not just that big box on the right that everybody is sometimes stuffed into, right? Really work to include your automation teams in all of the areas where they can add value, right? Not just one of them. That will save you so much time and effort along the way. So I'll leave you guys with 5 kind of words of wisdom, or if I were to give you an alternate headline for this, is don't do what I did in a lot of these cases. But here's a few good nuggets. Don't just blindly automate. Don't go in and automate for the sake of automating. Somebody told me just because you can automate something doesn't mean you should automate it. The question is there real value to come out of it? Do you know, this question kind of came up a few minutes ago, but, you know, don't always, if you do all UI tests, don't assume that UI tests are the only way to do things, right? Consider if there's another way of doing it, whether API testing is a good approach or not. Kind of look at what it looks like from that standpoint. Use the right tool for the job. Sometimes you can find a single tool to do everything. Sometimes it's multiple tools, but use the right tool for the job. Especially a lot of the large enterprise platforms today all have a tool that is really geared towards helping you succeed with that particular platform, whether that's Salesforce or SAP or Workday or, you know, any of the big boys all have a tool that has got advantages of using it for that particular platform. Even the JavaScript frameworks have tools that are targeted for those particular frameworks. Don't try and shoehorn your thing into a tool just because that's what you already have. Make sure you're using one that actually is going to help you succeed. Another one is don't automate to a metric. It sounds kind of counterintuitive, but what I mean by that is you know, really focus on, you know, put it this way, you know, 90% of you know, your tests need to be automated. That's great, except for that's a really easy number to gain, right? You introduce the possibilities of false positives and things that are not really valuable. You're just automating to create a number rather than adding value. It's okay to use those as kind of a guide or a measuring stick, but use them in a way that are telling you whether you're being successful or not, and not whether you're meeting your quota, so to speak. Recognize that there's no one size fits all. This is a, you know, hard one sometimes when you're first starting out, because it's easy to look at the stuff online and say, oh, the Spotify way or the Facebook way, or, you know, Netflix does it this way, or Atlassian does it this way, or, you know, insert company X has succeeded by doing automation in this way. And that's great and all, but what is often lost in all of that is those approaches work because of their environments and the systems and the people and the processes that were in place in those environments and those organizations. Unless you are a complete clone of that organization, don't expect it to be the exact same approach or the exact same result. You're going to have to tweak it to fit what fits and works for you. And then finally, the last one is, you know, be realistic around your expectations and manage them accordingly. Don't expect to always reduce headcount just because automation has been successful. The chances are, in the reality are, you've got a bucket of work that needs to be done that hasn't been done because your manual testers or your team has been so focused on just getting things tested and done that, you know, you needed that bandwidth back. And so it would be really, really good advice to just go and use that time for the things that allow you to expand your coverage, expand the scope of your testing. Start looking at some of those dark corners that tend to bite you after the fact. And Milan, again, stole my thunder a little bit by adding his magic bullet point on slide 1. So thanks for that, Milan. Good job. It's not a magic bullet. It's something that will give value to you, but it's going to take some time to get it built and in place, especially if you're just starting off. Don't expect it to start getting value, you know, at the end of your first week. If you're following your roadmap and you're kind of sticking to that and you're going along those lines, what you'll see is that over time you have started adding massive value. But if you look at the early stages of it, it's going to take some time to get there. So don't, you know, stick to your plan, work through it, and you'll be in good shape. So with that, we'll open it up to some questions potentially, or, you know, depending on where we're at time-wise, Andrew, if you want to hold them for the panel, I will defer to you on that.
No, thank you very much. Thank you very much. You now join me in the cloud now, you see, aren't you?
Yeah.
So I know that the stuff that you're cracking with all this kind of end-to-end testing is not easy. You know, I used to work for a small German software company called SAP, and just seeing some of the landscapes that you put up on the slides, it's quite scary, really, these days. You know, it's not one application in the organization.
Yeah, it gets complicated fast. There's a lot of things. There's so much that's out of your control along the way that a lot of people don't stop to think about how, when you're stringing all this stuff together, you don't have that kind of control, and so much stuff can change. I put the slide up with the timeline, but things change literally on a week-by-week basis sometimes.
Exactly. No, thank you very much for doing that presentation. So we're going to have a quick, just a 2-minute bio break. Given that people probably have been sat maybe in front of their computers for at least an hour now, we're just going to do a 2-minute break, and then we're going to hand over to our final presentation from Michael, who's kindly joined us from Toronto. So we'll reconvene in a couple of minutes. In the time being, actually, I'm just going to do a general chat with the speakers. So one of the questions I got actually was about, you know, you're now in testing. I'm going to ask this to Milan actually. So initially, you're now obviously deeply involved in the testing fraternity, you could say, or the La Familia of testing. How did you fall into that? Have you got a 2-minute explanation, Milan, of how did you fall into the testing, quality engineering kind of space? Is that something you can share with the audience?
Yeah. So I've been in this world since 12 years now, and it's interesting because I was studying computer science, but more on telecommunications side and network technologies. And when I finished my master's, I didn't know what to do with myself, so I was kind of trying to figure out what I want to do. So I was traveling a bit, but then I finished my travels and I still didn't know what to do. And then one day, a friend of mine called me, and she's the physiotherapist, and she just said, "Hey, I have one of my patients, and he's doing something with computers, and I kind of related to you. but he's forming a new company, and I thought maybe you would be interested. I was like, okay, well, let's try it. But I didn't really have anything in mind, you know, anything like, oh, there's gonna be some new interesting thing. So we met, and then he started actually interviewing me. But I just thought we were gonna meet for a coffee and just see what's all about. But he started interviewing me with all these questions about algorithms and some riddles, some mathematical riddles and stuff. And I was like very, very confused. So I failed all of those. And then he invited me for a day of interviews. You know? And then I said, okay, let's see what's going on. He also told me that he's starting, he has, because it was a company from Vienna, Austria, outsourcing software testing company, and he was opening a new office in my hometown, in Belgrade. And he said, I want to find some new forces for my new company. So I went there. It was 8 freshly graduated students and myself. I finished masters, and a few of them were still in the university, but they were all coming from mathematics, and he really wanted to have people from the math world. And then we had really, really difficult interviewing. So we did a lot of tests, mostly math. Then I had some questionnaire about testing. What do we know about testing, about development and stuff? And to make it a little bit shorter, in the end of the day, he was choosing 5 out of 10. And he was announcing in front of the meeting room the names. Okay, you passed, you failed, you passed, you failed. And in the end, there was 2 of us left in the waiting room. And then he came out and said, "Do you think you passed?" He asked both of us, and we were like, I didn't really care much. And the guy next to me, he was like, I don't know. And then he told him, "You failed, but you were better." So I was like, so I passed, right? And then he told me, "You were the worst one doing the test, you passed." And then he told me why, because I'm not coming from the exactly field he was looking. I didn't know anything about testing. I really didn't know anything. But he needed someone because someone like this to make the balance, you know. And then we had 3 months of trainings, education, basically free work. And we were trained to be consultants, like to go and look for new clients. And during this time, we learned a lot about testing and everything, and we passed all certificates and everything that was needed. But basically, this was very interesting how I ended up here. And 12 years later, I'm still here. We still meet sometimes, even though he's in retirement.
That wasn't N26 Bank then, it was a different company.
No, that was 12 years ago. It was an outsourcing testing company from Vienna. We were doing automation in the big insurance companies mainly. And it was very traditional tooling, IBM, Rational, HP Quality Center. I was also working for SAP in Vienna for some projects, but I pretty much jumped there out of nowhere in this.
So just what your story shows, I suppose, is no matter what your background is.
My background is actually engineering, but I was studying for telecommunication. My idea was to work for some telco company, network technologies. That was my main domain area.
And you never looked back since then. You see, the sky's the limit.
Yes.
Yeah, you'd be in the cloud. You should be in the cloud with me. I need to send you that image for next time.
Yes.
You come to the cloud with me or on the beach with John.
I will steal it for the next one.
Okay, fantastic. So hopefully the participants have now had their relevant bio break and now got their relevant beer in front of them. I'm looking at Michael's desk. He's got a cup of coffee, not a beer. Or I've got gin and tonic here, no? Kind of. No. So what I was going to do is, if it's okay, we're going to kick off into give the stage to Mr. Michael Bolton. with his amazing shirt on. It looks like he should be in Hawaii with that shirt on, actually. He should be sat with John.
He was going to be down here with me with a beer.
Yeah, well, our clothing looks a bit dull compared to Michael's. So what I was going to do is if we can get Michael to join the group. Are you okay to join? Hi, Michael. Greetings, greetings from London and Berlin and Nashville.
Well, you know, that's what it's like. So everybody is well aware, I trust, that Toronto is this tropic island paradise where we set
palm trees on every corner, man.
You bet. That's us. That's us. Waving elegantly in the breeze.
So I think you're going to be talking about the secret life of automation. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that you can share your screen, and we'd love to hear your talk.
Okay. Well, I'd like you to stay on if you would, Andrew and John and.
Yeah, we're staying on. Don't worry.
Yeah, sure.
We're gonna have your presentation, and we're gonna do a panel at the end. I've got some great questions to ask you all.
I'd like you to help me understand this. Does this look like agile testing to you?
I can see 9.8.1 to verify power accuracy.
Yeah. Does that look like agile testing or any kind of testing if at all, if you like?
It's just like a task list to me.
Yeah, that's how it looks to me too. I mean, is there any testing content here at all?
I've noticed this is where John and Milan have gone on mute now, you see.
Yeah, but we've also got, it's a checklist.
Correct. Thank you, Ole.
Is it a checklist? Well, I guess it's a checklist. But where's the testing part? I mean, you could automate this, right? In theory, at least. I prefer if it were for making tea. Okay. All right, here's my take on it. This is not testing. This is not testing. This is obsessive demonstration. Right? This is just somebody trying to demonstrate a set of steps. The closest thing to anything that looks like a testing thing is here, where they talk about verify that the zapper reports the power setting value plus or minus 10% on the display. But that's not a test, it seems to me. The only testy-like thing is step I. What about this, though? Is that testing? What do we think? Andrew?
I'm here. This is like a question Q&A, is it now?
Well, it's nice. I find it more fun. I don't know, to have that level of
interaction.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, here we go. Oh, let's come back. No, it's a pretty checklist.
It's a pretty checklist. But isn't this a test?
It's a select. It looks like a SQL statement to me. And when, then, given.
You
need to select all. That's all you need.
This is Gherkin language. This is a language that's used in that cucumber thing, right?
Uh-huh.
So, and we got somebody else in the chat saying, it's a pretty checklist for making a sandwich. Well, okay. I don't think this is testing either. This is human readable code for a demonstration. What about this? That's our friend George from the Jetsons. Whoops, sorry. Is that testing? It's repetition. Is it testing? Feel free to weigh in. Anybody who wants to. I think everybody can optionally unmute, can they not?
No, I've muted everybody, but you can put stuff in the chat.
Yeah, okay. So put stuff in the chat. What's our take on this? It's repetition. We cannot what? We cannot. It's automation, not testing. Well, that's interesting because I keep hearing people these days talking about their automation strategy. We cannot unmute ourselves. Oh, well, let's...
Let me have a look. Well, I'm trying. I want to give you the stage, you see. I want to give you the stage.
That's all right. If people want to talk, I think we can trust people. It's like in a real presentation when we're all in the same room. Most people stay fairly quiet most of the time. That's okay. So we cannot unmute ourselves still? Okay. Can you give it a go?
Just give me a second. I'll try.
Yeah. It's a it's a great example of Zoom's tendency to run that tool that Microsoft provides with all of its development tools. That is the user interface scrambling tool.
Okay, now somebody's unmuted now, so we can get any questions. So
I'm unmuted.
Okay, how boring it is. Well, here's the trouble I've got with all this. The trouble I've got with all this is that this is, it seems to me, how people talk about testing and how people represent testing these days. They talk about testing as an activity that is automated, but that's got to be wrong. That's got to be wrong, because testing is evaluating a product by learning about it, through experiencing it, through exploring it, through experimenting with it. And that includes all kinds of stuff: questioning, studying, modeling, observation, inference, generating ideas and overproducing ideas that we've generated, and refining ideas that we've overproduced, and abandoning some of those ideas. This to me is what testing is all about. Testing is risk analysis. Testing is critical thinking. Several years ago, I started making this distinction between testing, which is that stuff at the top, and checking, which is the algorithmic process of making algorithmic evaluations by operating and observing the product algorithmically, and then applying algorithmic decision rules to the observations, and then reporting the outcome of the decision rules algorithmically. Is there a key word, do you think, that I'm trying to hammer on here?
Process?
I think, yeah, good guess. Put it this way: I'll keep teeing them up like that, John, and you keep hitting them.
I'll keep hitting them out of the park.
And I appreciate that. That's great.
It's the only baseball we're getting these days.
It's true. All right. So I want to talk a little bit about what I think the role of automation is with respect to DevOps, and with how testing fits into this business. As we are developing a product, we're going through this loop where we are working with a business, and the business wants a product of high value, but it wants to keep the cost of development low, right? I mean, that's reasonable, because high value of the product, that's how the customers, or how the business sells stuff to customers, how it makes money, how it allows us to stay in business. Low cost of development helps with that too, though, by keeping the business sustainable. In order to get a product of high value, we got to build it. We want to keep the cost of development low, and we want to study what we built to make sure that the product solves the problem that we want it to solve for the customers, for the business, to be able to sell a successful product. So at the beginning of the project, or at the beginning of the sprint, or at the beginning even of the preparation of some lines of code, we've got this question on our minds, which is, all right, do we know how this thing should work? We want to build something. We want to be asking ourselves, in a testing, critical thinking kind of frame of mind, do we know how this thing should work? Do we know what we want out of this product? Then that turns into design-focused testing, and especially review. testing in the form of thought experiments, testing in the form of generating ideas about how we might ask, is there a problem here about the product, to help us discover what the customer really wants. Then, as we're building the product, we've got this question that really surrounds discipline. Are we building what we think we're building? And whereas in the top corner, we're envisioning success, down here, we want to get disciplined and think about focusing on the nuts and bolts of what we're doing. Writing code, checking the code at low levels, especially, so that we're trying to keep track of whether the product is doing something reasonably close to what we want it to do, whether what we've just done is reasonably close to our intentions from the box up above. That happens as we're building the product and trying to keep the cost of development low. Then, as we move around this cycle, and this cycle is not just a loop, it's like a fractal. We're thinking about this in terms, it seems to me, of every sprint, every story, every feature, every function in every feature, every object or class that we're developing in every feature or in every object that we're creating. What do we have to do to be ready to test it efficiently? That is the preparation frame in which we are advocating for ways of making the product more testable and organizing the project and the systems within it to make testing work go faster and more efficiently. This, it seems to me, down here is the natural realm for DevOps-y kinds of stuff, where we are trying to make the product more practically testable and preparing ourselves for answering this question up here, which is, do we know about every important bug? And in that, what we're trying to do, as we're anticipating failure in the preparation frame, we're focusing on realization. Now, realization here is a pun, double meaning. Realization in the sense of accomplishing our goal. We've realized our goal, maybe. But maybe we're also going to realize, in another sense of the word realization, maybe that there are hidden or rare or subtle or intermittent or emergent problems that are coming from the fact that the little bits and pieces of the product, when we put them together to interact, don't do what they think we're going to do. We can have a system of components that work perfectly well independently, but don't work that great when we put them all together, or that work really, really well for the purposes we imagine, but not necessarily for the purposes that the customer is going to put the product to. It seems to me that in the DevOps realm, we are not really focusing on this thing, that this is the realm that is not focused on building the product, but is focused on studying what we've built to find those deep, hidden, emergent problems that get in the way of our intentions for the product. Now I want to introduce you to a new word, GEMPUB. GEMPUB. Remember this word, plant it in your mind. Think in terms of GEMPUB. GEMPUB. What is GEMPUB?
GEMPUB, right?
No, of course not. No, it's a hard.
Just clarify that.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't want this GIF thing. Right. Absolutely. We want to be clear about this. And I can tell you why it is pronounced GEMPUB. To be clear and specific about it, it's an abbreviation. It's a compression of a few words. You know, data compression is always a good thing, right? It stands for getting machines to push buttons. And what I want to underscore here is when we're talking about automation, what are we talking about? We're not talking about automating the testing, because testing cannot be automated. That business of thinking critically, that business of risk analysis, that business of analyzing a complex system to understand how people might have problems in it, that's a social thing. That's an intellectual thing. That's a cognitive thing. And machines don't do any of that stuff. What we're mostly doing is we're automating the typing. So checking can be automated, but testing cannot. And I want to underscore that. I want to underscore that as being a really, really important thing, because when we talk about automating the testing, what we're doing, I think, is we're systematically misleading our clients into believing that this is stuff that can be done by machinery. But nobody goes to an automated doctor. Nobody reads news created by an automated journalist. Programmers are not manual programmers or automated programmers. Manual managers or automated managers, such things don't exist. So why do testers let themselves get talked about in this way? Trouble with GemPub is that in order to automate the typing, in order to automate the interaction with the product, I got to ask ourselves what's actually being covered from the product. Now, if I look at conferences and books and blogs and articles and testing forums and stuff like that, what I find is that the most thoroughly tested part of any application seems to be this thing right here. I mean, that's what we're talking about. And all the other stuff that we might be doing is secret. And the problem with this is GemPub and automated typing like this is dazzling. And so it looks good because when our clients walk by, they see all these screens with all this stuff scrolling by, like that stuff at the beginning of the Matrix. And people look at that and they say, oh, there must be testing happening here because I see stuff happening. But the most important parts of testing are not what's happening on the screen or at the keyboard or in the computer. The most important thing about testing is what's happening in your mind. That's the important part of testing. That's what we're trying to do. Now, if we're talking about testing something, it seems to me, here's some stuff about logging in that we might want to test. Just the action of logging in, all right? Just the action of logging in. Maybe an authorized user won't be able to log in. Or maybe an unauthorized user will be able to log in. Maybe a hacker will be able to access the system. Maybe the username or password will be intercepted. Or maybe the user will be fooled into revealing credentials. Or maybe failed attempts to log in won't be retained properly. Or maybe we won't be thinking about scalability or performance. Or maybe we're not thinking about what logging in test, how that finishes, how that process goes on. Well, look. Here are some of the ideas that I had, and I'm not a security expert, so I had to do a bunch of research into security problems, potential security problems. I am very interested in aspects of quality that might get in the way of somebody's task. So is the product capable? Is it reliable? Is it usable? Is it charismatic? Does it look good? Does it look right? Does it look, is it matched to the kinds of people who want to use it? Because after all, some people love using this. They got little tools over there. And some people like using a GUI interface. If they want to transfer something, maybe they want to do it this way. I've got bugs flying around in my office because there's some plants that are in here. So the question is the product suited to the people who are using it? And I worry that this focus that we've got on GemPub is looking only at the functional aspects of the product. And it's not looking at how the product might have problems that matter to the people who are actually using it. Now, part of what the claim is that we're saving time for exploratory testing when we set stuff up to be checked automatically. But I wonder about that. Is it really true that we are saving time for exploratory work? Well, that might be true. It might be true if the time that we're spending on preparing this stuff doesn't displace time that we have for automated checking. And here's my experience. It's not easy to program a machine to find stuff on the screen that regular people and users can find really, really simply. And here's another part of the secret life. The secret part, one of the parts of the secret life is management's conception of what testing is actually like. Supposing that we are a tester who has been given 90 minutes, the manager says, go test something. And here's what the manager thinks that's like, it seems to me. The manager thinks for let's say a little part of the product, we've got little bits of functionality that we want to examine and perform tiny experiments on. And each one takes, let's say, 2 minutes. So in the manager's fantasy edition, it takes 90 minutes to test this little area of the product. And the manager thinks, okay, so every 2 minutes, look, there's another bit of achievable coverage accomplished there as we go, test, 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 and we can even speed this up a little bit. And that's what the manager thinks is going on for the tester. Every time we perform a test, we're obtaining new information about the product, new information about risk and that sort of stuff, and everything's going swimmingly. All right, somebody can unmute and tell me what's actually wrong with this.
Oh, there's lots of things wrong with this.
Okay, what's wrong with it, John?
The big thing doesn't take into account the how much time and effort each individual test takes, because you could have 90% of your time taken up by one test and the other 10% of your time for everything else.
Well, I don't know. I thought when we plotted this out, you know, when we planned our testing, I thought we said that what we were going to do was we were going to, you know, we're going to break this down into a nice work breakdown structure, so that whoops,
Yeah.
sorry, I need to displace that.
But that doesn't always line up with what the reality is, and this happens. I wish it was just in testing, but every single facet of a process, this fallacy tends to bite people.
Okay, so maybe
Yeah.
what you're saying is it's more like this, more plausibly. We have to spend some time configuring the test environment.
Yep.
And then we have to input the test data. And then, only then can we start our testing. And so we test away, test away, test away.
But again,
And,
still on test one.
oh, geez, no, we got a bug. So we got to investigate the bug. And, oh, God, when we investigated the bug, that clobbered the test data. So we got to reinitialize that. And then we do some more testing and so on and so forth. And yeah, okay, things are going along there. Possible bug. Okay, definitely a bug there. We need to report that. That's only 60% of what would be, in theory, possible without bugs or without setup work.
Yep.
Now, how does that look to you, John? Is that more realistic, or?
I think that is incredibly more realistic.
How about this? Maybe 12 minutes to set up, or 16 minutes to set up, and then we do some testing, and then we find a bug. And then we find another bug. Then we have to reset the environment, and then we find another bug. And oh, look, there's another bug.
Yep. I'm just waiting for the one where you get where there's a bug that prevents you from doing any more, so you lose 3/4 of your time.
Well, it looks like we're pretty close to that.
Pretty darn close.
Okay. Oh, no, we did find 4 bugs. How about this? An afternoon in the life of somebody who is doing scripting in order to help find bugs. So we configure the test environment. And we write some code to input the test data, right? Because we want to use tools to do that, generate a lot of test data. And then now we got to debug the test data input code, because as soon as we tried to run it, it didn't work. And then, okay, finally the code works and the input is done. And now we run the script. Oh, damn. There's a 1-byte problem in the check code. Okay. So, okay, we're back on track. Now we start running. Now each block here, by the way, is 5 minutes. There's a whole afternoon, as opposed to the 2-minute thing we were looking at before. Okay, so now there's a possible bug. We've got to investigate that. We look at the log file. We look at the console log. Ah, geez, there's a 1-line problem in the script, because there's this thing I want to show you, in fact, myself in a couple of minutes. And what I've got is I've got corrupted data in the log file, because the front end of the program that I was wanting to test. And so part of the demo that I intended to do for you all soon is really getting nailed, because I got some bad data in there. So now I got to go fix the problem in the test data, and I got to reinitialize that. Now I run some automated checks. Okay, oh, it runs red. So there's a possible bug. Oh, geez, the bug is in the check code. It can't find that element. So we try some stuff in the console. And we were playing with stuff in the console. We find this interesting thing. Hey, look at this. Object plus object, what does it return? Check this out, Jimmy, come on over here, have a look at this. Object plus object, what does it return? You'd think object, okay. But then check this out. Object minus object returns not a number. And then we realize, oh, geez, hang on, we're supposed to be working, just a sec. We gotta stop playing, we gotta get back on track. Okay, back to work. Let's try to locate that element in the DOM. Oh, good, there's an ID. So let's just change the code to grab the ID. And okay, oh, damn. The ID changes on the subsequent page. Okay, so wait a sec. Damn, the ID changes when we only refresh this page. There's something in the code that's changing the IDs. Okay, so look up. Let's try to grab the element by a CSS selector reference. Okay, oh God, that's not working. So let's try, oh my God, let's try XPath to help us out with that. All right. Okay, so, XPath actually locates the element, so we do 5 minutes of coding, and then we can get our checks running again. Hooray! Oh, damn. Instantly the check reports a bug, and we need to investigate it. Okay, definitely. This is our first bug in the actual product that we found so far. So now we got to do some pinpointing and troubleshooting. Maybe we should have put some more logging into the check code, because we can't quite, when we run the check code, it doesn't exactly tell us where it's failing. So maybe we should have put some more logging into the product. That would have helped quite a bit. Okay, good. Now, after 5 more minutes, we pinpoint where the product fails. Now, off we go to report the bug. Then what happens, John?
Start all over.
No, not yet. You're missing something.
You're going to go down the rabbit hole of trying to get a bug put in.
That's right. We write up the bug. We curse Jira privately. We go to Slack and curse Jira publicly. I hate this tool. All right. So then finally, a few moments of successful checks and everything's going great. And then, oh, geez, they just changed the product and they've invalidated all the checking we did this morning. And what's more, the change that they made to the product invalidates the check code. In fact, what it invalidates is that XPath stuff that we put in to try to write the find code. And they said, okay, we just changed it back to make sure the IDs are consistent. And now you can back that change out. And oh my God. So we fix the check code. And then we end up with this. How much product coverage do we actually get? It seems to me that this is a secret. And it's not a
dirty little secret.
It's a dirty secret. It's a dirty secret in the life of testers, and it's a dirty secret in the life of DevOps, that most of the time what we're doing is we're spending time getting code to fight with other code. Now, in the world that I'm thinking of, why are we even doing this from the GUI? Why are we even doing this at the GUI level? The GUI is designed for a graphical user interface. If what we're trying to do is we're trying to get access to the business logic in the product, it seems to me that it would be a lot smarter to use an application program via the application programming interface, via the API. But
if you're not testing the interface, don't worry about it.
What's that?
If you're not testing the interface, don't worry about it. There's other things that are better suited for that.
Well, it seems to me like eyeballs and human emotions, and instead of looking at some kind of bitwise comparison between this and that, the smart thing to do would be to appeal to things like this. My recognition of a problem when I'm testing, when I'm interacting with a product, my recognition almost always starts with a feeling. It starts with an emotion. It starts with frustration that I can't get something done. It starts with irritation. It starts with annoyance. It starts with impatience, waiting for this thing to happen. Or it starts with a surprise. Now, James Bach, my colleague, and I have this argument periodically where he says, oh, come on, Michael, that's not true for every bug that you find. But I actually think it is, because my emotional reaction, even when a bit of check code is running, he says, well, what if you're running an automated check and it reports red? You know, the big deal. No, my emotional reaction to that is, damn it, There's an inconsistency between the product and the check code somewhere. Maybe it's a problem in the product, or maybe it's a problem in the check code, but it hits my eye, something's running red, and I have to think to myself, ugh, what am I going to have to do to investigate that? So I don't think that we're actually really saving time for exploratory testing. I want to know how we could be using tools in other ways. Now, to this problem that I spoke to, I got a backup. I have an instance of a case in which I think all of the people who are using tooling skills in DevOps, I think we should abandon this whole idea of automated GUI checking. And I think that a lot of the work that we do in DevOps associated with trying to check the program is misplaced. I think a much better idea is to check the build, because tools can be really good for that. Tools can be deployed to see, is the right stuff going to the right place? Is it showing up at the right time? Is the version of what we're about to test consistent with the version that we think we're testing? Lots of stuff put into the build in order to check that the build is working properly, that everything is being built okay. And if we do that and relax our intention, oh, and of course, we can do lots of checking of the API. But I think, I think that a whole bunch of that needs to go back to the programmers and go back to this idea of discipline. Now, there's a problem with what I'm saying here. And the problem is I'm not a manager of the programmers. I have been, but in this case, I'm not. As a tester, it's not my job to tell the programmers what to do, but it is my job to shine light. It's my job to shine light on what's going on in the product and what's going on in the product so that management can make usefully informed decisions about it. I think it'd be much more interesting for those of us with coding skills to use tools in other useful ways. And Manuel, exploratory automation. Ooh, sounds like exploratory automation. Here is an example of exploratory automation or automation tooling that can assist us in learning stuff. So this is a depiction of the navigation through Meetup. Meetup is a product that we were testing during a rapid software testing applied class back in July. And this is a product that the developer had sort of re-inherited. It had come back to him, and he's a friend of mine. And so we put this product in front of a group of testers who were testing it. And James Bach, who was running the class, created a log file analyzer to grab data from the logs. And then we used YED to render the data and to do this. Let's see if I can find that movie. I created a movie of this yesterday. And if only I could find the movie. Where is the movie? I have a really useful tool called Search Everything. Search Everything allows me to find things. There it is, Search Everything. And I can find stuff by searching for start.mp4 and sorting by date. See, this is using tools in powerful ways right here. This is something that should come with the operating system, but does not quite. And it is not doing what I hoped it would do. So why is that, I wonder? Oh, well. Not going to show you the movie. All the movie did anyway was scroll through a log file and do that. So anyway, we took the data from the log file and we examined when a particular API endpoint called another endpoint. And having analyzed the log file, we could see the kind of coverage that testers were getting by linking endpoint to endpoint. And what we discovered was, of course, that testers were doing this. Now, James, there we go. James was able to determine that there were endpoints that we weren't even aware of that were being called here. Stuff that we didn't know as testers of this product that were actually being interacted with. James and I had not discovered these two, so they weren't on our map. But through the visualization, we were able to see this aspect of coverage that was not documented in the APIs, but testers had kind of successfully stumbled over it. Now here's a chord diagram that shows the log file analyzer for coverage from, or it identifies coverage for a tool that James created, a bot that creates a meeting and then 255 bots respond to it. And the idea of the bot is to do a kind of a stress test of the program and to interact with the product and see what happens when we try to overwhelm it. What you see here is that there are only 3 endpoints involved. All of this stuff is really interactions between answer and respond. And there's a little tiny bit of schedule right in there. It's small enough that when I'm looking at it on my other screen, I can just barely see it. So in this particular case, the automation doesn't wander and create complex flows incidentally or accidentally the way humans do, unless it's programmed to do that, and that's much more complicated to do. Here's what happens when human testers swarm on the product. Notice differences? Now, my point here is not that automation is bad. Here's the cool thing that set of bots actually discovered, which is when you put enough stress on the product, it not only blows away the, it blows away a table that the system requires in order to do the meeting scheduling. We get this great big dump of JavaScript all over the screen, and we get some stuff from the middleware and everything like that. The point is that one kinds of automation can give us the power to gempub lots of times, to get machines to push buttons lots and lots of times. But other kinds of automation could increase our observational and analytical superpowers. But yet we don't talk very much about that. And I wish we did. I wish we talked more about this kind of automation. How much of that testing or checking work is actually being done by developers or by testers in close collaboration with the developers so that testers can apply the tester's mindset, the mindset of, I will find trouble everywhere I look, to counter the developer's mindset of, I will build things that make your problems go away. And the I build things that make your problems go away thing, that's great. And that's exactly what we want to do. But of course, in building things that make your problems go away, we end up building stuff that has problems of its own. So 2 things that the tester can help with, it seems to me, is to help the programmers anticipate how there might be problems in the product and to work with them collaboratively on that, but also to work with the programmers on making a more testable product, one that is more amenable to interaction by tools, to the degree that we want to do that with tools. And I think doing that at the API level is a fantastic thing. But also creating a product that has fewer problems in it already so that we don't encounter those shallow, relatively easy to find bugs that will slow us down when we get to the point when we're wanting to do a deep analysis of the product, except we get swamped by these shallow bugs near the top. So that's another big secret, because we don't talk about that very much. What we talk about, it seems to me, on the web is how cool it is that we can get Selenium to press buttons, or how we can get Applitools to find a button that a human would be able to find with no effort whatsoever. A human would be able to recognize and find that button and perform experiments with the product that would allow us to see problems in it. So here's what I think is happening. A lot of testers are doing work that I think need to be part of the developer's normal set and a setting that need to be, developers need to do this. Now, why don't developers do it? I think there's 2 reasons. One is the motivational thing. They're thinking in terms of building stuff. nobody wants to think about problems like that. Not if you're a builder, not if you're in the builder's mindset. So testers end up sweeping up after that part of it. But there's a second motivation for developers not doing that, it seems to me. And the second motivation is that developers don't have time, they say. So as testers, one thing that we can do, I think, is to stand shoulder to shoulder with the programmers and agree that the developers don't have time to do this, and it's time that they need in order to understand what they're programming, so that we can maintain this crucial element of what agile software development was supposed to be about, which was maintaining a sustainable pace, so that the stuff we're building and the complexities in it don't outstrip the capacity of our imaginations to recognize how there might be problems with it. You know, people these days keep saying, oh, well, we're in an agile development environment, we're going so fast, we don't have time for testing. That's what the developers say. And that literally means we don't have time for learning about the product, for experimenting with the product, for gaining experience with the product. No craftsman, it seems to me, would say that. No true craftsman would say, I don't have time to understand this thing I'm building. And I think as testers, one of the things that we can do with managers is to help people understand how important that is. Okay. Manuel, I want to honor your question or your issue of the manager's fantasy concept that translate to the idea that the person who finds a bug is responsible for the bug.
Can I laugh?
What's that?
Can I laugh out loud, audibly?
Please. Jerry Weinberg referred to this as the hot potato theory of software development.
Yeah, not a big fan.
And there's a way around it. There's a way around this, I think, which would work great, which is to say to the manager, I am finished testing based on the time that we've got. My opportunity for testing the product is over because you know, it's the end of the sprint. It's 4 o'clock on Friday, and I'm going to be needing to go home in an hour from now. Tell you what, could you yourself have one last look at this thing and to see if there are any problems that I haven't found? And then it becomes a manager's problem, because the manager had it last at that point. It's a ridiculous way, of course, as Manuel is suggesting, it's a ridiculous way to think about problems in the product. And as testers, it seems to me that one of the things that we need to work on are certain kinds of rhetorical skills with some kind of flourish that can help managers realize what a ridiculous idea that is. As testers, we don't put the bugs in. No more than the weatherman or the weather forecaster is responsible for the rain at the picnic. We shine light on the product. That's what we do. We shine light on the product so that the people who are building the product and the people who are selling the product, people who are promoting the product, can get a handle on, is the product they've got the product they want? That's what we do as testers. Now, in the DevOps field, I think one of the best ways that DevOps people can help with this is to check the integrity of the build, but also to remember that if there aren't people interacting with the product, experiencing the product, that there's a much better chance that the product we've got will not be the product we want. In other words, we need people to experience with the product and to understand the problems in it, to encounter the problems in the product as real humans do, so that we can identify those problems and make decisions about whether those problems matter enough to fix them or whether we can live with them and release the product with those problems in place. But we can't fix them if we don't know about them. And we can't know about them if we're spending all our time on GemPub. There's where I'm at. I think I'm done. There is another question that we could ask, which is, what interesting bugs are we actually finding? It'd be kind of cool to talk about that. Maybe to set up some kind of community where we could anonymously report bugs that we've discovered. and talk about how we found them. That's part of the secret life too. We're not talking about that, and I wish we would. Okay, I'm done. Andrew is apparently just completely, oh, there he is, he's back.
I'm here.
Head out of the clouds.
I'm floating in the clouds, listening to your amazing talk. As ever, you always create thought-provoking presentations and dialogue, which is I very much appreciate. So, thank you for joining, and thank you for the session. So, what I think we're going to do now is we're just going to do a quick little panel. Milan has actually, unfortunately, had to go and do some family stuff, so we're going to get. I think we're going to get the crew back on the call. Mr. Robinson, are you there?
I'm still here, unless you,
John said
you took my voice from me.
Yeah.
I would never take your voice. Here we go. So, in terms of, we're just going to jump in. So, thanks very much for that presentation, Michael. I think you know, as ever, what you do is you strip it back to some fundamentals and some principles, which is really appreciated, because I think, you know, as you point out, there is kind of sometimes people get lost in the tech, get lost in the tools, and don't really think about the role and the kind of what they should be doing as a tester. And as we talked about before on previous meetups, it's this kind of challenge of being seen as being the last wicket keeper before the release goes out. And lots of pressure gets put onto that kind of role. So appreciate you continuing to fight the good fight and raise those kind of topics around how to, I suppose, develop the discipline of testing.
Well, I hope that other people do that too. I would love it if more people joined us in this. James and I have been, and you know, certain of our colleagues. I noticed, for example, that Adam White is on the call, and Adam is a dab hand at this. In terms of helping our clients to understand what testing is, what it means, and what it can really do for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Okay, so I know we had a few questions on chat. One of the questions a bit earlier was, we'll pick up from Adrian a bit in a second, but I think we've got a couple of ones from Oleg. I don't know if the first one is actually just a general comment. If the root cause of all bugs are humans, how do we go about testing humans? I presume that's kind of a bit of a comedy from Oleg.
It is, but I also think there's a statement that can be made here that is actually applicable to this, and that is, we need to take the time to actually understand the users and the people building our software, and not just operating in a vacuum. It is kind of a funny question, and it doesn't really have a definitive answer, but I think taking the time to really understand our space, it will go a long way towards that.
I would, in fact, offer that what we're really doing is we're always testing humans in some sense, right? To some degree, we are we're certainly testing the work of people.
Yep.
But you know, let's just keep in mind, people are wonderful, and they're fallible, and that's okay.
Yep.
That's a normal state of affairs. You know, in every project, there is some degree of confusion. There is some degree of incompetence. There is some degree of innocence and naivete. And those things are normal. It's normal to have those things in a project. Why? Because we're always dealing with something that is to some degree novel. We're always dealing with something that is new to us. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that, it seems to me. And the confusion goes away as we develop understanding of the product, as we develop skill. It goes away. That confusion and that naivete dissipates. That's a good thing.
Agreed.
Yeah, I think the point that yeah. So as Oleg said, it's in part it's a joke, but in part it's not a joke. So yeah, I agree. So the second one from Oleg was about as the software production world evolves, is there room for hybrid roles, test ops, QA product owner, etc.? Any view on that?
I think this is an interesting question, and it kind of touches on a topic that is another one that is one of those dirty little secrets that we don't often talk about, and that I think the answer is largely dependent on your organization and the type of people that are in those roles or potentially playing those roles and what their skill sets actually are. Because one of the big challenges that I've seen in previous roles is a lot of times QA, the product owner one especially, they unintentionally or accidentally start playing that product owner role when they start creating and defining what the acceptance criteria and the test cases are, if they're not fleshed out well enough at the product owner level, or when they turn into stories. And so they're kind of accidentally playing that role anyway. And the challenge there is it's not always the right fit or the right place for QA to be that defining person for the product, right? At that point, you're now defining what the product can or cannot do. And that opens you up to a whole big gray area of what's a bug and what's not a bug, and is the root of a lot of those arguments that Michael kind of alluded to earlier, where you have to convince somebody that a bug is actually a bug.
But I don't have to do that. I don't have to do that.
Okay.
I don't have to convince somebody that a bug's a bug, because I don't decide whether something's a bug.
That's well, and so I think that actually goes to my point of it's really hard when QA ends up being the person that's defining what that criteria is, and they're also the one that's finding the thing that contradicts that criteria. It puts you in a tricky situation for how you have that conversation, right?
You think so?
I do, because it ends up being a thing where it's not necessarily how the product was designed or intended. It's just the scenario or the test case that the QA person came up with that is defining what that feature does or doesn't do, and how it was built may or may not be in alignment with what was intended to be built or what needs to be built. And it like I said, it's not a black and white answer. It opens up a really, really gray area that has a lot of different shades. And every single organization is different. Every person is different when it comes to this. And I think it's something that has to be acknowledged. I don't think it's a bad thing to have people play multiple roles or have different hats on, but I do think it needs to be very explicitly spelled out or clarified.
Well, but here's the thing, John, I think you've already been in on this part of the conversation. I think we had this conversation before, but for the rest of the group, the problem starts with the quality assurance moniker.
Yep, it's a good point.
It starts with us calling ourselves QA. I from Ken Kaner in 1996 or 7. And from Jerry Weinberg, by the way, in a slightly different context, not too long after that when I met him. Both of them point out, well, wait, do you write the code? No. Do you fix the code? No. Do you set the scope for the product? Do you set the requirements for the product? No, no. Do you have a budgetary authority over the project? No. Do you hire and fire the developers? No. Well, how exactly do you assure quality at that point? As Confucius said, if things are not called by their right names, then there will be trouble. And this is the beginning of the trouble for testers, it seems to me. I reject, whenever I'm on in a position where so are you the QA? No, I'm the tester. You, dear project manager, are the QA. You, dear programmer, are the QA. You are the ones who are putting the quality in.
So would you say that the role of what we've traditionally called QA is more of a quality gatekeeper?
Oh my God, no. No. How could it be? How can you, do you run the company? No, me neither. So how could what we be doing be called gatekeeping?
So who plays that role, right? And this is one of those tricky bits in the especially the world that software development's in today, where you need somebody that's their area of responsibility, because we all like to say quality is everybody's job one, right? But the reality is that doesn't always play out that way.
Isn't it the product owner, surely?
It's management. It's a management job. That's what management literally means, to manage the project.
Yes.
Does it not?
But you need the person needs a voice, right? Or not the person, the quality in and of itself needs somebody to be the advocate for this isn't good enough, right?
But wait. How is that not the project manager's sole responsibility in terms of the project manager deciding whether something is or is not good enough? That's why they get paid the big bucks.
I think on a theoretical level, I completely agree with you.
Do you want to run a company?
Practical level, though, in how a lot of businesses operate, and especially the larger the business, the more real this is, that role ends up being played by the QA team. And it's not just because it's because that's the role, that the expectation of that role at every layer of the organization is that. The
expectation of whom?
It's the expectation of leadership, of the project, of the product development. It's the paradigm that has been set. So whether we like it or not, that's the world that we live in.
Hang on. No. Just a second. They're called leadership, right?
Agreed.
Okay. And then they say, it's your job to manage the project, and it's your job to decide whether the product is good enough.
Sure.
Okay. If that's the case, I am the project manager, the one who has said deciding whether the project is good enough. And I have no problem with that, because I've been a program manager. In fact, I was a program manager for what was at the time the best-selling piece of software in the world, according to PC Magazine. And that was actually kind of not right, because MS-DOS was the best-selling piece of software in the world. But one week or another, QMM 3D6 or DeskView or DeskView 3D6 would be the best-selling piece of software in the world at retail distribution, according to PC Magazine. And I was a product manager for that. We call it the program manager. So I've had that role, and I didn't like it very much, actually, which is why I got back to testing. But here's the thing. It was my job to decide that. It wasn't some tester's job. If a tester told me, you can't release this product, my reply would be, thank you very much for your opinion. And then I'd offer a verb in the imperative, and then either a pronoun or a preposition after that.
Yeah. So here's the thing, Michael, I agree with you. But the reality is you are the exception and not the norm.
But wait, in what conceivable world is somebody who does not have product management authority making release decisions?
The last 6 companies I've been at, that's been the case.
I bet it's not. I bet it was.
It is, because I was in the role that dealt with it every single day.
And your title was QA?
What's that?
Your title was a tester, quality assurance?
My title was director of QA for a very large internet company.
All right.
I was responsible for working with the people that did ostensibly have this level of ownership. And the reality was they didn't think that was their responsibility. And I wish that was an abnormality, but it wasn't. It was the standard operating model.
Well, John, just a quick question. Were they asking you to be the accountable person on the RACI then for that quality?
They were asking the quality department, and me as the head of that organization ostensibly was the final gatekeeper.
Yeah, the wicket keeper. Yeah.
Right.
But
whether I was the person that was verbally saying yes or no, depending on the team that we were talking about. But the reality was the quality organization owned that thing. Now, that wasn't what my ideal scenario would have been, but that was the way the entire organization was set up, and there wasn't any changing that train off those tracks, right?
So here's my question for you, John.
Yeah.
If you had said, the product is not going, and the CEO said, oh, yes, it is.
But exactly, the people above me in the chain would 100% do it. The problem isn't the people above you. The problem is the people on your level and below. And that's the challenge at the rank and file, and the perception in this case well outweighed the reality, is that QA team and the quality team is the people and the team responsible for yay or nay. And that's not ideal.
So let me tell you how I handled that. Let me tell you how I handled that when I was a program manager, and they decided that product managers would hold the release decision. Product manager being a marketing thing. Product manager said, so can we ship it? And my answer was, yeah, you can do whatever you like. Well, is it all right? I said, here are the problems that we're aware of in the product. And they said, okay, well, with those problems, can we ship it? And I said, you can ship, you can do whatever you like. You can decide to have those problems fixed, or you can decide not to have those problems fixed and decide to take the consequences of it. But the shipping decision is not my decision. In fact, what I would do in that circumstance is I would politely refuse to make that decision.
So just to jump in, Michael, then you would say that, I mean, I mentioned product owner. Isn't the product owner responsible for the ship decision?
That's what I think.
Mm.
I mean, I'm not the babysitter of the product owner. And if their product owners say, oh, I don't know what to do, I say, here are the problems in the product.
Yeah, make a decision.
You decide whether these are problems for the business.
Exactly.
On a technical level, it looks like they're problems to me.
Yeah, and I again, I don't disagree with you, and I think that is the ideal world. But it
goes back, John, to the point that Michael was making a bit earlier about shining the torch on the issues. Yeah?
Agreed. But I think there's a lot of, one of the things that is often disregarded is, once an organization has made a decision in a given area, whatever that decision is, they're not moving off of that place very easily. And I have literally seen them make changes at the personnel level for people that did not fit their view of the world, right? That were not willing to say, no, that's not good enough, right? It's at a certain point, you have to recognize the environment that you're in. Some organizations in some places, absolutely, you can reposition that argument and that statement. But to assume that you're going to be able to do that in every organization is...
Okay. So
it's something I'm not understanding, John. I want to understand this because I want to understand you. You're saying they point to you and say, you're making the ship decision, John.
Yep.
Okay. So at that point, my response would be, okay, that's fine. No problem. But I would like the product manager title, and I'd like the product manager business card, and I'd for sure like the product manager salary.
Yep.
But if you want me to be a product manager, I'll be a product manager.
And this is where it boils down to, though. When you have a disconnect on what all of those terms that you just said were, they all mean something different in every organization that I've been in.
Sure.
Right.
But I don't think the lines of authority are actually different. You can put whatever label you like on it. But
I disagree, actually. I think the lines of authority are vastly different depending on the organization you're in.
Yeah, but I think my intersection on this topic would be, there's a concept called RACI, yeah? Responsible, accountable, consultative, informed. If you actually get, if you get
ringable neck.
Yeah, if you get the accountability, the RACI right, yeah, then who is decision around ship? Yeah, who's decision around quality? So, there's only one person can be accountable.
And that's ultimately what I'm advocating for. It's not necessarily that I'm saying your approach is wrong, Michael, or that I'm right. It's more identifying who the accountable party is, and that the party that's best suited for making that decision. I think you have to be able to have that person in place, and it's somebody sometimes different in every organization.
All I'm saying is, it ain't me. If I'm a tester, it ain't me. I'm not. I will politely refuse that job, or I'll take the promotion.
Sure.
But I won't. I don't want to confuse things by saying you're responsible for the a business decision, and you're responsible for quality somehow. Those things can't be separated in my mind. Sorry, Andrew.
Okay, guys. No. This is a great debate. I mean, I'm just thinking about the timing of that. So I know you're in a slightly an afternoon with your great shirt on. We've now been going for just over 2 hours 15 minutes nearly. We've got another couple of questions I just want to ask before we move to the kind of closure of the session, because I think obviously this panel discussion we could obviously go for quite a while. It's a great discussion. One of the questions from Neil. He's talking about, my organization is moving to developers writing and owning the tests. How would you go about coaching developers to adopt the tester's mindset?
You first, John. I think it's really hard because testing is a mindset, and I think it comes to understanding the product or the space that you're in, and being really knowledgeable about that space. You don't have to be a great tester or a great technical person to be a really good testing resource or be somebody that adds a lot of value in that way. I think the most important part is that you are able to look at things through the lens of how the product should be used and what the expectations for its use case are, so that you can bring that to the table, right? That the technical side of it can be taught. The analytical side or the approach to it is something that's a lot harder. And that's the part that I think is the more important aspect of it sometimes. That's why I look for people that aren't necessarily always technical resources to start with.
Michael, you got any views?
Yep. First of all,
well, hey,
if you don't like these opinions, I have others. Okay, so Neil's question is, my organization is moving to developers writing and owning the tests. Well, I don't know what owning the tests means, unless maybe it means owning automated checks. Maybe Neil can help us understand this. Are we talking, because tests to me aren't something you write. A test is something that you perform. A test is an experiment. No scientist will talk, oh, I'm going to go out and write an experiment today. They don't talk about that. They talk about performing experiments, which includes all these things in terms of modeling the system that they're trying to understand, and designing experiments and interpreting experiments and so on. So the test is not something you write. Next thing is, maybe Neil means owning the testing. And well, maybe the organization wants to do that, maybe it doesn't. But here's what I would offer for that. The tester's mindset, as I think I mentioned earlier, is fundamentally, I might not have because I just came off that other thing. The tester's mindset is oriented towards finding problems wherever I look. That's as a tester, that's what I'm thinking. My job is to find trouble. I'm looking for trouble. Now, it's really hard for a developer, or for anybody for that matter, to look for trouble in their own work. I just had a dramatic case of this land right in front of me as I'm trying to demonstrate a thing. I can actually show it to you now. This cool little tool.
Just to let you know, Michael, as well, that Neil's come back to they own the definitions of the scenarios, writing of the checks, the tools to use, and the associated processes. So that's the definition of what he was saying, I think.
Okay, that's cool. Do they own, by any chance, the analysis of where problems might be, of examining the user domain? Do they own that? Do they own the process of investigation? And do they own risk analysis and critical thinking?
He said, Neil says they will have to, yes.
They will have to. Okay, so if the job is to coach them to do that, it seems to me it's really hard for an individual person to do that with respect to their own work. So one thing you can do is to say to a developer, I want you to go find problems in that person's work. And at that point, the developer is at a farther critical distance from the work. And the developer is able to look at that thing that they're looking at without that set of preconceptions, and without it being, this my precious baby. No parent looks at their baby and says, "Oh my God, that's an ugly baby," right? No parent will do that. And no developer will do that of his or her own code for very long, because among other things, they tend to be under pressure to build something new, or they tend to think, okay, how can I make this look the way I want it to look? But that's not the key. The key, it seems to me, is to have other people reviewing the work. Whatever the work is, if this developer owns it, unit A, then some other developer looks at unit A and reviews it. So one of the powerful ways to do that is the buddy system, and to say that we are going to examine this product and we are going to interact with it on the basis of the fact that I'm not going to be responsible for solely reviewing my own work. I'm going to be responsible for reviewing it, of course, but I need help from other people. Find problems in it. And as a developer, I also take on the responsibility for looking problems in other people's work. That's how to put developers more closely into a tester's mindset. And when I do a review of a piece of code or a bit of functionality or a component or a feature or a story, my job is not to say everything's okay. My job is to find problems. That's the tester's mindset, looking for trouble. That said, I think that developers with a natural bent for building things are less likely to be into that than somebody like me who's into trouble, finding trouble.
You're always in trouble, at Michael.
Well, there's that too. But okay. Ask the organization this one question. How many developers have you seen who say, I love getting problem reports from the field, and I love analyzing them and trying to reproduce them in-house? Developers don't do that. Testers do. And so this whole business of getting rid of testers is foolishness to me. We need some people who are going to be focused on trouble.
Well, so the final question I want to pick up was, oh, here we go. We've got another message. What was it? Yeah, nice answer. Looking at heuristics through mnemonic acronyms similar to GenPub to help expand their scenario generation in the interim. And yes, my children are beautiful. Thank you, Neil. We knew that. Nice answer. Nice answer. So, final question I want to ask for the group. So I know we're still running quite late here. But I know people are still staying on because it's a fascinating panel. It's from Karen Muller. What is the future of manual testers in the DevOps world? Is testing dying now? Do manual testers need to change their field?
I'm going to let Michael start on this one.
All I have to hear is that question one more time and it's going in.
So what is the future of manual testers in the DevOps world?
Manual, okay, there is no...
Is testing dying now? And then do manual testers need to change their field?
Can we please stop talking about manual testing and automated testing? Can we please just stop it? Stop it! Karen, you don't go to a manual doctor, do you? You're not John, you're a programmer, aren't you?
Yeah, not a chance.
Are you a manual programmer or an automated programmer?
I try and avoid it at all costs.
So you were head of QA someplace? You were head of quality assurance?
I was.
Were you a manual head of quality assurance or were you an automated head of quality assurance?
Oh, it absolutely depended on the day. Which meds I had in me.
It sounds like a stupid question, doesn't it? It sounds like a ridiculous question.
No,
I think we should treat it as a very, very unhelpful way to think about testing. Look, nobody goes to a manual doctor. Nobody reads automated journalism. There are no manual or automated parents. Your baby is, your children are beautiful, Neil. Are you an automated parent or a manual parent? Well, nobody talks about parenting that way. nobody talks about development that way. Nobody talks about journalism or research. There's no automated researchers. The police don't hire automated detectives or manual detectives, but these people use tools.
Yeah.
And they use.
Well, it goes. I mean, it goes back to that original principles of what you talked about the discipline of testers. Yeah.
Well,
it's back to foundations again.
I think though, one of the things you kind of hit on an interesting point, Michael, that I think the action itself and the people that do it can have like specific skill sets that they're better at than others, right? If you've got developers, right, you can have a front end or a back end, or you could be a full stack developer, right? But you have a targeted skill set. In the same way, you as a tester, you can be, you know, really good at the hands on the keyboard, you know, clicking the mouse button kind of tester in a much more manual fashion, or you can have more of a development skill set and be a lot better at creating the automated testing. But the actions themselves are two different approaches. It doesn't mean that the testing itself is different, right? The testing is the same. How you do it, that can absolutely be different, right? And it should depend on what your organization is.
John, you know, there's an itch that I get whenever I hear that. When you talk about doing the testing in terms of pressing the buttons and moving the mouse around, that's not what testing is. No more than the typing is what journalists do. Why do we talk about it that way?
But in terms of your approach, in terms of how you execute the testing, that's what I'm saying is like the delivery and the way you go about doing it is different, right?
Well, but that's all we're talking about is the input mechanism there. What I want to pay attention to is the experiencing of the product at various levels. Now, the product is always going to have an end user experience, but there may also be a developer oriented experience, right? If you're dealing with microservices, you're creating something like that, then your end user is a developer. Now people say, oh, come on, it's an application program that uses a microservice, or there's microservices are talking to other microservices. Well, yeah, sort of, but not really. What really is happening is that there's a communication with people at both ends of it, right?
So I'm gonna ask you a question, and Andrew, this is a little bit of a I'm gonna toss a grenade in the middle and step back, but this goes a little bit back to the conversation that we had a little bit last week, in that everything that you've said makes a ton of sense. But one of the advantages that you have is that you have been in this space for a long time, and you put a lot of thought and a lot of intentionality, if you will, to all of the stuff that you're talking about. And you're talking about a lot of theory and a lot of concepts that make a ton of sense if you have that background that you have. The challenge that I think that a lot of people have, especially when whether you're in the QA space or not, but the challenge is the people that don't have that background or that experience and kind of just landed in QA with not a lot of history or a lot of background, and they rise up through the ranks and they become those leaders that now all of a sudden are being tasked with making these calls and these decisions. How do you square that, or what is the best way to better prepare them? Hey, look, I teed you up, Andrew. What's the best way to prepare them for that, right? Because I think everything that you've said has a ton of merit and makes a lot of sense, but you have to have a lot of that background and that assumption or knowledge. And if you're not part of this conversation or this call right now, where is this conversation happening to that level on a widespread basis?
Can I offer you something that might sting a little bit?
Sure.
Okay. If you agree with me, why do you keep saying QA?
Because
if you agree with me, why do you stop saying, or why do you keep saying manual testing?
Because I still have a industry that doesn't know any differently, and I have to play in that space.
And how are we going to change it?
Because we have to do a grassroots movement. It's not going to come from you and I making a statement like that.
I think it's absolutely going to come from people learning to do this. Here's how I think it's going to change. I proposed about 11 years ago a distinction between testing and checking. That you're probably familiar with, that because I put it on slides earlier, right? If somebody says to me automated testing, like all the way through this conversation up until this point, if somebody says to me QA, I don't dispute that after the first time. So I explained to them, no, I'm sorry, I'm not a QA. I don't assure quality. I am a tester. I identify as a tester, and I don't use the QA moniker, and I don't use QA as a verb. So after they've understood that, did you hear me? Okay. If they say to me at that point, so are you going to have time to QA this product this afternoon? I will simply say, sure, I'd be happy to test this product this afternoon. And what happens is, after a little while, because people want to be experts, they want to feel like experts, they start talking like the cool kids do. They start talking like the experts do. If I'm the testing expert, I take control of my vocabulary. I take control of what people call me. And we can see this in other cultures too.
Take all that aside. I'm going to go back to what I kind of started that with. If you're not on this call and on this conversation, how do the people that are doing this on a day-to-day basis inform the core of what we call the quality industry or the test industry, right? How do they start to learn that? And this is kind of where I was going with it, in that it was we need a place for this education to happen earlier in people's career. Right?
It's happening right here, right now. And
it's like Matrix Reloaded. It's like a reboot.
Right. But this is one place for it. But this is 2.5 hours out of your day, and it's not something where it's going to compete or register sometimes on the same level as you went to university for it, or you are very intentional about coming into this field. There's such a widespread
empire
differing of opinions of content in the one place that everybody looks, which is online, right? And you have the various competing certificates that you can get, which are sometimes at complete opposed to
maybe if I say, maybe this is the start of a new movement. Maybe you got to give birth to it somewhere, and this is the whole point of having the panel discussion was to let's face it. Last Friday, as we all know, some of the people know on this call, that I did a search on LinkedIn, typed in the role QA to find out how many people in the world have got QA in their role, or their job title. And that triggered an hour's discussion between the speakers and myself, an hour. And we didn't.
Oh, that was just a prep meet call. It wasn't even.
That was exactly. That wasn't even talking about the actual prep for today. So, and there's 531,000 people on LinkedIn have got QA in their title. Yeah. So that triggered a big debate about back to first principles, back to foundational stuff. Maybe we need to do something about it. That's the whole point of having this community, is to start to raise these topics and get people like you guys on this session tonight to
You've heard of this thing called Agile, right? Right? Because I remember working in an organization that was really, in many important ways, Agile, before there was such a thing as Agile development.
Yep.
What happened was a bunch of people got together, a small group of people. They're listed as the declarers of the manifesto for Agile.
That's right, yeah.
That's how they did it.
Martin Fowler et al.
It was really funny, because by 2007 or 2008, I was in a conference in India where CA Technologies,
bless them,
were saying, "Oh no, we're Agile too." It's like, all it takes is impassioned people who have, and I appreciate your compliment on this, John, the intentionality of it. It's got to be our intention to do that. We've got to evangelize. And I've been doing this every day for the last 15 or 20 years. Every day, there's another tester I talk to, or there's another colleague that I speak to, and we try to figure out how we're going to take responsibility and pride in our work, just like the Agilists did. The Agile movement started because a bunch of developers said, you know what, we're sick of producing crap. That's really what happened. They said, we're just tired of not doing this well. We're tired of not taking responsibility. The weekend testing movement, which was started by Paramala Harsapad and Ajay Balamarugadas and I think it was Manoj Jain and Santosh Tupad in India. Those 4 people got together. They were students of a guy named Pradeep Sundarajan, who was a student of James and of me. And they got together and they said, you know what, our companies aren't training us. Let's do that ourselves. And they got together in a cafe.
Power to the people. Yeah.
Oh yeah, they got together in a cafe and they said, all right, we know a little bit. Let's get together and test for 1 hour, and then we'll talk about it for an hour, each weekend. And by the 3rd weekend, they had other people who wanted to join in. And by the 5th weekend, they had people in other cities who wanted to join in because the word had spread. And for a little while, for a few weeks, this movement was meeting online. Ajay was all 4 of them were real strong contributors to it, but Ajay was a master of going out and finding little things to test and getting people talking about it, getting excitement in it. And the biggest, most exciting part of it to me is unshackling ourselves from the test case. Unshackling ourselves from seeing testing as this bureaucratic rote activity and thinking, you know what, let's give this over to, let's give the rote stuff over to tools, but let's use tools in ways that help us to visualize what's going on. Can you give me the screen for just 1 sec?
I have long held the belief that people are way more creative when they stop trying to test something and start trying to break it.
But no, we're not breaking it. We're not breaking it. We're just finding out where it's broken.
Sure.
Just as a time check, we do have to close this in the next 5 minutes. So otherwise, I'm sure the audience will shoot us.
Oh, they just leave.
Slowly dwindled down. There's 16 or 13 left, but
yeah,
this is a good conversation though for a lot of people.
Okay, so here's a little program that James and I developed. We've had various versions of it years ago.
So Clara's just said she won't shoot, or Kiara's just said she won't shoot. So that's good.
Yay!
Thank you.
We got one element.
Very nice of you.
Quick, okay, duck, get on the table. Duck on the table.
All right. And here's a program that it tries to identify whether a triangle, what kind of triangle it is. So that's a scalene triangle. It's got all 3 sides different. And here's an equilateral triangle, all 3 sides the same. And then let's see, here's, oops, no, it doesn't have all 3 sides the same because I hit 4 by accident. And there is, by this time, there is an equilateral triangle. And then if we make this side 3, there is a scaling isosceles triangle. So these 2 sides are the, okay, so what we did, James and I did recently, was we generated this, which is a little program that goes through the log file and visualizes the test coverage. Visualize, look at this, we don't have very many scalene triangles being tested. We got a lot of invalid triangles. And I wondered, what if we did a triangle that is 3, 2, 1? The mathematicians call it a degenerate triangle. A degenerate triangle is a triangle that has 0 height to it. Well, it says not a triangle here in the application. Let's see what it says here in our log visualizer. Okay, so we got another not a triangle there. This allows us to see at a glance what kind of coverage that the testers obtained. Oh, look, we can also see way up here, we can see what the largest number was that I entered. We can see the longest string that I entered. Tools like this seem to me kind of interesting. Oh, look, here's Adam White. Adam White has suddenly snuck in and started to test the triangle. Let's see what Adam's results are. We can click on Adam and just see Adam in the table there. What you up to, Adam? Oh, look at this. Adam has tried a bunch of things that are not a triangle. But Adam, I noticed you haven't tried any isosceles triangles yet or any scaling triangles yet. So we can visualize coverage. This is a kind of a test automation that I think would be lots of fun to do. Lots of fun to do. And much more engaging, much more interesting because it affords analysis rather than just check, 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 green, 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 green. So there's Adam showing his Adam-ish way. I mentioned Adam earlier.
He jumped straight into the demo. So that's what you call audience participation, isn't it, I think?
Yeah, I encourage it. Oh, look, Adam entered little Bobby tables there. So, all right, look at this right away. We can get an analysis of what he's done. In order to test it, we can see it, and we can ponder it or grok over it. I think that'd be really cool. Let's start talking about testing tools like this that are much more interesting and much more exciting, it seems to me, than tools.
Back to the point I made earlier, like your tools should enable you to be more efficient and effective and have a higher degree of confidence. Doesn't have to be what we've traditionally viewed them as.
Yeah, well, my job as a tester, it seems to me, is not to build confidence, but to destroy unwarranted confidence.
Fair enough.
Right.
So let's spread the word. Thank you, Andrew, for this.
No, thank you. If you give me the screen back as well, let's just wrap up.
You got some books to show.
Oh, I got to stop sharing. You should be able to kill me as the. There we go.
I'd never do that.
Host.
I'd never do that.
There you go. I got to go shopping. Oh my goodness.
So let me just. Can you see that? Well, you can see that, can you?
Not yet.
Okay, let me just check.
There we go.
Oh, there we are.
Okay, so one of the little, just to finish off today's session, and I cannot appreciate or thank enough our guest speakers. Milan has decided that it's too late in Berlin, so he's obviously had to go and look after his family. But one of the questions I asked the team before, the speakers before we actually came on this session, was to provide some books. So this is about giving love back to the community, giving some guidance to the community. So this selection of books is books that the speakers, and also I've added a couple in as well myself, books that actually the recommendation is for further reading. There is obviously some classic books here from Mr. Weinberg.
I was gonna say, if you're gonna follow one of these threads, he's probably a good thread to go down.
Exactly.
Oh man.
Yeah. Oh, here we go. We got you saw it live from Michael's bookshelf. Also, Michael suggested to do a look at Harry Collins' Shape of Actions. I think that was your recommendation.
This one.
Yeah. Okay.
Fantastic book, especially for people who are involved with what machines and humans can do, right? That's what the subtitle of it is. And this one is relatively newer from Harry. It came out in September of last year. And it's called Artificial Intelligence. I also really recommend Meredith Broussard's book called Artificial Unintelligence to prepare ourselves for the oncoming tsunami of stuff that cannot be checked.
Yep.
Got to be tested. That's going to be
And
exciting.
obviously we had a couple of recommendations from Mr. Robinson, Agile Testing, the Lisa and Janet's classic novel or classic piece of work. And then obviously, what can a webinar be complete without mentioning Mr. Kim's Phoenix project, obviously a DevOps classic. You're probably aware of the stuff that James Whitaker did when he was at Google. So I've inserted this one, how Google tests software. If you've not read that one, that's a very good read. And then also Katrina, who is now heads up engineering at Xero in New Zealand, has written an interesting one on LeanPub in a couple of years ago about practical guides to testing in DevOps. So, as part of, we did a session back in March. We talked about AI and testing in the age of AI, which I know is one of the topics that Adrian raised as well a bit earlier, which is we put the recording on YouTube for that session. Obviously, I think if we opened up the panel again to talk about AI and testing, we'd be here for another period of
Yeah,
time.
don't do that. That would
So-
open that whole tsunami that Michael was talking about.
But you know, as part of giving back to the
Brilliant.
community, I just thought a bit of a little survey that we did with the group, and this is the books that people were recommending. If you haven't read, it's worth a read.
Yeah.
In terms of what's next, I think we're all aware that in the last couple of months, it's been a bit of a new world that we've been living in. So our plan is to continue to do future webinars. We do thank Milan from the N26, Milan Jon from Provar, and obviously the legendary Mr. Michael Bolton joining us today. He's getting more books out of his webinar.
You know what's funny about, you know what's hilarious about this book?
What's that?
Only mentions pandemic once.
Oh, really?
Kind of
Okay.
aside.
That's
Right?
good.
Which is-
So, as you are all aware, we have obviously got a site on London TAD on meetup.com. Obviously, been publishing this stuff on LinkedIn to get people to come along to the session today. We're planning to do another session in June, probably later on in June, probably week 3, week 4 in June. We're looking at getting some people from customer organizations, a mixture of some legendary speakers we're working on at the moment. If anybody has any suggestions for future speakers, then please send me an email or send me a message through the group. And I suppose that all I can say is, in terms of thank you for today. So thank you thanks for joining Michael. Thanks for joining John.
Thank you for hosting us.
Absolutely.
Of course, it's been a pleasure. And it was the automation triple header, mobile cloud and the secret life of automation. Hope you're all safe and healthy with your families, and we will look forward to seeing you in the future. Have
Good
a great
day.
day.
So long. All the
Take
best.
care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.